Hello, and welcome to the Gamer Librarian Podcast. I am your host, Adrian, and today we will discuss more on Resident Evil 4 Remake, E3 2023's cancellation, and more. Afterwards, be sure to follow for updates on future episodes. Thank you for joining. Now, for this episode, you might notice that my voice is a little hoarse or scratchy. That is because over the weekend I went over to the Palladium in Worcester, Massachusetts, in order to see a metal showing. The bands featured there was Acacia Strain, Fit for an Autopsy, Full of Hell, and Primitive Man. And this was my first time seeing any of these bands live. I've only heard a handful of Fit for an Autopsy songs. My absolute favorite is Sea of Tragic Beasts, and a few Acacia Strain songs, which I never really vibed with them during my listenings, but I think they put on a killer show. Every band that was there on that day blew it out of the water, I would say. Um, I think they were all charismatic. They all performed really well. The crowds for every song, every set was bonkers. One of the most wild metal shows I've ever been to. The people of Massachusetts know how to go hard in those pits. And I only really went during the Fit for an Autopsy show. I jumped into the pit during Tragic Beast, and I was getting jostled around from start to finish. There's a lot of big people. I saw a bunch of smaller girls there. They are always a little worrisome because they get hurt. But I saw this kid. This kid was no more than like 10 or 11, and he was crowd surfing from the first set, Primitive Man, all the way to the end, Acacia Strain, and he was going crowd surfing 8, 9 times per set. That was crazy. I've never seen a kid do that so much. And kudos to him. He didn't get hurt at all. I saw him drop down a few times. People don't catch him right away when you're crowd surfing. If you've ever done that. Um, but kudos to that kid. Dude's a legend. And that whole show was phenomenal. It's why my throat is so hoarse. So apologize for that for at least the duration. Try to speak pretty clearly and concisely for everybody to hear. But that was an absolutely amazing show. If anybody's a fan of those bands and they get a chance to see them live, especially probably Primitive Man and Full of Hell, they're probably lesser known. It was my first time seeing those bands in any capacity, and they killed it. I'm gonna go look up their set lists or their song lists in a few minutes and get some songs that I recognize or ones that I like, because I think they killed it. That was an amazing show. They were really uh, inspiring, and all these metal shows, they're always so nice, right? It's all angry loud music, but all the time when you're in the pit, you're gonna see people falling down or get hurt, and the people in the crowds and stuff, they always help people be picked up, and the uh, band members and the people who attend the shows are always so courteous to those individuals. These are places for people to have fun and have a good time and let out some stress and enjoy some music. And the last thing people want to do is get hurt or hurt others, even though there's fists flying constantly in these pits. I got hit in the back of the head, and my nose is a little sore. I think I got a foot there. But I'm still kicking. It's just my throat, a little soreness and stiffness in the neck and torso. But I'm a big metal guy. There's not a lot of metal bands that I listen to on repeat. I think probably the most bands that get the most rotation is Lorna Shore and Chelsea Grin. I've been a big Chelsea Grin fan for absolute years. I saw them live around 2015. I've been a fan ever since. They just put out their newest albums, Suffer in Hell and Suffer in Heaven, which some tracks on there are pretty good. I think my favorite is probably Crystal Casket or something along those lines. Names are always escape me, but I think Chelsea Grin's a really good metal band. And Lorna Shore has gotten up in recent years. I think with their newest singer, their vocals have propelled them into new heights, and all their songs lately have been truly great. I've seen Chelsea Grin maybe 3 times, Lorna Shore only about twice, and I'm not sure if I'm going to see any more metal shows this year. Tickets have been so expensive lately for shows. I mean, tickets up for this was just $25 for the Palladium show, but we had to drive up to Massachusetts. It was only a 3-hour drive, and we paid for a room because the show ended around 11 or so, and we were too short to even drive back home. That's probably the longest trek I've taken for a show, and that was worth it. Absolutely worth it. If you were there at the show, Drop a comment. Let me know what bands or songs you were in. Maybe I saw you in the pit. Yeah, hopefully this won't be the last metal show I ever go to. I hope to go to many more in the future. Now, what I want to talk about mostly today is probably the biggest news that happened this week is the cancellation of E3's showcase this year for year 2023. And this isn't anything new. We've had um, late cancellations and pullouts from companies for E3 for the last few years, ever since the pandemic really started in 2020. E3's kind of gotten the worst of it. The video game industry has been hit massively because of this, and E3 is trying to get its legs back from it. But I really think that a lot of companies, game companies, and maybe tech companies for computer parts, hardware, or sponsors probably aren't as keen into pulling into E3. Now, I've never been to E3. I've always wanted to go as a kid. I always saw E3 news articles every year, like in Game Informer magazine and online. The convention looks extremely fun. I've never been somebody who always wanted to just play demos and earn posters or sit in lines and talk to the people who make the game. That all does seem really cool, but what we all really there for are the game announcements. And I think that's probably where the biggest audience draw for E3 always was the game announcements. Everything else is a nice bonus. Demos, I think, are really great to a degree. I think that they cause companies to kind of shift where their resources are going to go, right? It takes time to make a slice of life demo for a game, um, especially when you're talking about a game that isn't fully finished yet. Now, we knew a little while ago that Nintendo was backing out of E3, and that's been the wayside for years, I think, even before 2020. I think they backed out 2019 as well, maybe 2018. Nintendo's always been their own horse. They've always been on their own schedule, and that's always worked out for them. Now, other companies like Sony and Microsoft, they also do showcases around the same time as E3. Obviously, when E3 was canceled, they did their own thing for the last few years, and I still believe that's going to be the case this year. We're still going to have Microsoft's little showcase that they normally do, usually with the other competitors. It'll probably be with E3 itself, right? They'll probably do some kind of event together. I think last year they had a live stream specifically, but Sony and their state of plays they're always random and they're never really part of some bigger thing. Sony has what they want to announce, and when they choose to announce it, that's what they're really going to do, and that's kind of been the case for the last few years. And uh, you can't really fault them for their choice in that. It's worked out for them really well. The games they wanted to make and the way they put them out has worked out for their schedule. Sony hasn't really had too many pushback with their game. I think maybe God of War was canceled, or I'm sorry, pushed back by like a month, or maybe early. It was pushed early, something around there with God of War Ragnarok, I remember. But Sony's been on a really good schedule, and I think that when it comes to showing off your games in that format, you need to be conscious of how your game is already built as a concept versus how you want it to be as a final product. We've seen it countless times where games have had trailers and demos and things were promised during those showcases, but they were never in the final product. And that's always been a really uh, rotten core to the video game industry is, things being promised that weren't really part of the product later on. And E3 is a physical convention, as for the most part, right? It's like a 3 to 5 day excursion where you have live streams as well, but the big bulk of it is going to those shows and having these companies dump in money for their event. You're gonna have, I think they're usually in Las Vegas or like San Francisco, kind of Comic Con convention styles, but we have companies making versions of games that aren't either finished for these demos or they're spending money on uh, convention items and all this. And I believe that that comes into a big risk for these companies when it comes to E3. I mean, they're not really recouping money. You're spending all this money to get the word out for yourself and the games that you want. And that could work out to some degree. A lot of game companies rely on that. Smaller industry titles, indie games would obviously be propelled and more popular if they have the outlet of E3 to utilize. But these game companies, I think, are realizing that the internet is probably the best way to just introduce your game. I mean, the big three, everyone knows Nintendo, Sony, Microsoft, and if a game has their title on there, people are going to know it regardless. If that game is an older title, it's already going to have a fan base of a few thousand, most likely, who are going to want to play the new game. Regardless of whatever game it is, if it's a complete genre twist, like if it's a shooter game that went into more of an action story, or maybe it's like a puzzle game originally, now is like more of an action game. Those shifts in paradigms are always sketchy for companies, but I think they notice that their best bet is to have uh, trickle information to us, a few trailers and stuff like that, and then put them online, and then hopefully the game will come out in a finished state. That's probably the best scenario we could ever hope for. Nintendo's been really on the ball with this. I think they've been doing that with Breath of the Wild and Smash Bros. And a lot of their other games where they don't show us a whole lot early on until I imagine the game is mostly finished, and then we start getting their trailers and maybe some gameplay snippets, and then we get to the final product. Now, I do think this is the end of E3, at least as a physical convention. I think that we'll probably absolutely not have as many or as large of an event as we probably had in the past. Like I said, it's probably a 3 to 5 day excursion, depending on what it is for E3 they're doing. I think some live stream events go on for the 5 days, but the physical convention is usually three. And I think E3 themselves and all these other companies will save so much money if they didn't really do a big showcase like that. I mean, we all think of it as just the game announcements time, right? Like we think of June, summertime as E3 for game announcements, and then we get to the winter where we get Game Awards, and that's just more game announcements. Like those are the two biggest time frames for these games to be announced, and that's a lot of games being announced all at once. That's a lot of announcements all in one time, especially for a year. And a lot of companies probably don't have enough games to showcase twice in a year. I mean, we've seen games be announced for and showcased for years. I remember seeing Dying Light 2 uh, stuff for years, since like 2018, 2019. That game just came out last year or so. And I remember seeing trailers, gameplay, and stuff like that for very long. Um, Especially when your game was already announced, right? Let's say your game was announced at E3, right? And then as the trailers get shown off, people start already be like, all right, where's the game? Where's the game? We've seen this trailer already. Where's the game? And then Game Awards rolls around, and then oh boy, we see another trailer for that game. Like I think Horizon Zero Dawn was one of those games that we just kept seeing trailers for at every showcase for Sony, like every single one. And it's like, okay, if you're not going to show us anything new, why are you showing us the same thing? And now I do know that these companies are going to have hopefully plenty of games in the future, but I would like to think that they were going to allocate resources a little more smartly in terms of making games versus promoting them. I think E3 is just a pure promotion stunt. I mean, if you like to go to those events, totally fine. Nothing wrong with going to a convention and waiting in lines, meeting people who made those games, meeting other people who like the same things that you. Absolutely nothing wrong with that. But we could see that with the dangers that have come with infections or crowds and things like that. I understand everybody's wary. And this is just me saying I think E3's over as a physical event. Game Awards, maybe. I mean, I think Game Awards is just like a really worse version of the Oscars. It's just my opinion, but I'm only there for the game announcement. That's it. All the games of the Game Awards deserve their accolades and stuff, but we can see that a lot of that isn't really about the games. There's a lot of things in these events that kind of take away from the games themselves. Now E3 is still gonna be around probably for online live stream kind of events. I'm sure they're gonna have partners with other companies and things like that. But I think personally it comes down to timing with these games. You want to show them off in a timely state where you're not getting any other competitors announcing similar games around the same time. Fighting games are just like that. We see it now more recently where I think a few years ago they had like a fighting game roundtable where a lot of prominent fighting game producers and company heads for like SNK, Capcom, more on the Japanese side, I would say, they got together. I think they all understand that like if you have a fighting game or multiple fighting games coming out within each other, you're diversifying those player bases, right? Only so few people who are truly good or gonna put their entire effort into a fighting game. And I mean like online, learning multiple characters, going to tournaments, things like that are stretched thin the more fighting games you come out. If you're a casual, you're just going to pick whatever fighting game most appeals to you, ones that you've played before, you identify with, you enjoy. If you've been a Mortal Kombat head for years, I don't see you going up to play Guilty Gear or anything like that. But you could. But that is the thing. There's so many other fighting games out there that they're all so different. You can't have one come out, let's say like in November, where I think we believe Street Fighter 6 might come out around end of this year, right? But what if Tekken 8 also came out around end of this year, right? People are gonna have to now choose between Street Fighter 6 and Tekken 8, and I think people who like those games are gonna either pick the one they love or both of them. That's the big difference between those two. But you are gonna have that kind of weird duality in sales where only one game gets like part of the fighting game community and the other one gets the other fighting game community. But the casuals will pump in those games. Smaller fighting games are definitely at more risk of getting hurt by this kind of scape with the public. There's only so many games out there that people can have time playing. And I mean, if I had to choose, I would choose to play Tekken 8 or Street Fighter 6 over a game like Guilty Gear or any other like anime kind of fighting game. I kind of like tend to be more into newer fighting games, and they look great. Those two other ones, Tekken 8 and Street Fighter 6. But I think those are really good examples of games that are true to how you can't have the same competitor game around the same time. That was a big fuel for first-person shooters early in the 2000s when we had the first couple of Halo games and the Call of Duty games, and then you start throwing Battlefield into the mix, and people would be having wars over which shooter was the best one. And they're all different. They're all absolutely different. They're fundamentally different with their mechanics and the way they play. And I think it really comes down to finding a game that you enjoy personally. Fighting games are just like that. Shooters are just like that. But again, you can't have these games come out at the same time. I mean, I know in high school, I went to so many minute releases, and either on the same week, day, or even month, I would be getting like Battlefield Hardline, and then Black Ops like 3 would be out in the same time. They probably came out in different years. That's a decent example. Halo 4, I know, came out at the same time as like one of the Call of Duty games, and that's always been a big misstep for the video game industry is when you have these full price games coming out around the same time, your fan bases do switch up. They're going to pick whatever game most appeals to them, what their friends getting, what they can get on the consoles. I think this all still goes back to E3 and these conventions. I think companies are just going to start putting out any information they can for free on their own end online, and then hope for the best that people like their game. I do truly hope that E3 continues in the future. I think it will, mostly in like the live stream internet space. But yeah, that's really just it on E3. I'm sure we'll get more news throughout the year, but I think it's safe to say until around 2024, this time, we're not going to know anything else about E3. And don't expect any of the companies to like probably do anything with that. I don't think they could buy E3. I'm not privy to any of the creators of E3's information. But with E3 on the wayside this year, the only thing we have to look forward to is the individual company announcements for this year, and then Game Awards, which is kind of the same thing. But a lot of companies are aware that I think Game Awards is a much bigger event than E3 has been in the last few years. So we see a lot more uh, prominent game announcements around the Game Awards, which I am entirely looking forward to. I think it's going to be really great. Now, I also recently just finished my first playthrough of Resident Evil 4 Remake, and I have to say, this is, in my opinion, the definitive Resident Evil experience. I mean, it had absolutely everything you would want in a Resident Evil game. It had difficult encounters. I can tell you, I probably died in every single encounter at least once on my hard mode difficulty. Um, the weapon I used most was the pistol. It was the only weapon I even upgraded fully with the times five critical upgrade that you can use to spend like an exorbitant amount of money or get those tickets for. That gun saved me so much. It was amazing. I wish I got more shotgun shells. That would have been good. The submachine gun you find in like the cryo chamber was really good. That ended up being my replacement for the TMP halfway through. Once I got that gun ended up being really great. This game has really good secrets. I think the side quests are straightforward. You get little papers, documents that tell you when side quests start, and you can, for the most part, go back to certain areas and get what you missed. Especially if you missed like resource items, there some of them appear on the map. I think if you buy a map from the merchant or get a DLC map, I think the might be where I got, you get little items on the map that you can search for, which would help with the playthrough. But this game was hard. This was probably the hardest Resident Evil game I've ever played. Stealth was probably the biggest help to this game. It helped mitigate a lot of encounters early on. You could take out a few villagers and enemies without having to spend too much ammo, which is really good. And I think the pacing was really great. You know, you're not dealing with Ashley for too much of the game. I think it's probably hardest encounter with Ashley as a companion was the trebuchet area of the castle, where the villagers are hurling like fire catapults on you, and you have to destroy them and destroy the gates. That was really hard because enemies would spawn as you made your way, and they'd like be behind you, and you'd have to. For these encounters, you really have to know where enemies start spawning if you're going to protect Ashley or start moving anywhere, because you have to be prepared for when enemies jump out of wherever they spawn or their windows, or if they're going to throw and shoot things at you. That was really, really prevalent. The hardest boss I would say I had to fight was Salazar, the little Napoleon kind of guy. He and his like flying nonsense was really difficult to mitigate or to fight against, especially in that area with the two level like up and down kind of map. But he was spitting stuff and he would charge at you, and then he'd leave those little black goo pods that would explode if you got near him. That was difficult at first, but thank God I beat that. That's probably the hardest boss. A lot of the other bosses are irritating, like the knife dude, Krauser. You just really got to chase him down when you first encounter him, or I'm sorry, you do like a mini knife fight in your first encounter with him, and you just kind of win that if you can. And then his real fight is when he chases you through like these trapped ruins, and he attacks you randomly, and then you get into like a big fight on some wooden pedestal where he gets like a prototype like metal arm. If you ever played the prototype games where you turn into like a monster guy with blades for arms, he kind of resembles that. He wasn't too hard. His like auto tracking attacks, where he would jump in the air and he would like slam down on you, or you could like use evade to get out of that. That was a really annoying attack. I was pretty low on ammo early on in that fight, so that was difficult to get going. The most irritating enemy was absolutely probably the regenerators. You don't see them often, but you encounter them in a certain point in abundance, like in absolute abundance, where at one moment you're dealing with almost four of them at once, trying to get the wrench to open up some part of an area, and the regenerators take up a lot of ammo if you're not doing your battle against them correctly. You should find a an item attachment, or I'm sorry, weapon attachment that lets you see the weak points and then go for those weak points. But those weak points are hard to hit. Those generators are slippery and they have so much health, especially on top of the regeneration. A lot of the encounters with them, you just kind of, I think, default to run past them rather than waste ammo fighting, or even worse, health fighting them. I wish there was a part where Ashley was in the armor. They make like a small comment where Ashley like likes the armor that she sees in some part of the game, and you don't really put her in the armor at all, which was kind of meh. I would like to see some moment of that. But this game was amazing. Combat was really hard. Ending was pretty typical. I think it ends about the same as the game. There might be a secret ending for impossible mode. I wouldn't know. Um, but I really loved it. I think it's the remake that Resident Evil 4 always deserved. I think it's the remake Resident Evil games deserve, like that kind of attention. Obviously, Resident Evil 2, we saw that. Resident Evil 3, I heard it wasn't as great. I think it missed some parts, but um, I still heard, pretty mixed reviews on that. For the newer games, I think they're a step in the right direction with their first-person stuff, but this was a third-person action game, and everything about it was great. Every enemy has certain weak points or flaws that you can take advantage of during combat. Like, you can choose to just shoot the weapon out of the enemy's hands, or shoot the weapon if they throw it at you midair, or parry their attacks. Obviously, shooting them in the head is the best option, but you can wound them or slow them down if you shoot them in the leg, or time it right, shoot them mid-attack, and they stagger. Really great. If anybody really hasn't played Resident Evil, I think Resident Evil 4 is the game to get on it. Me personally, I kind of like my Resident Evil stories to be a little more involved with Umbrella and corporation corruption and big, larger kind of bioterror events. I liked Resident Evil 6. I liked the whole actionscape of it. The monsters everywhere was really cool. But this is still a Resident Evil game where you're by yourself for the most part, and you kind of only rely on yourself. And that's still fun. Maybe co-op would have been really good for this game. I was not a big fan of how the larger Resident Evil lore fits into Resident Evil 7. That was a big thing for me because obviously Resident Evil 7 and 8 are different steps into their space. You have a whole new protagonist who's like a filmmaker, husband, man, or a news reporter guy, and you look for his girlfriend, and then that's really about it. And then it somehow gets involved with Umbrella. We don't even really know how. Like, we don't even fully understand how Umbrella works into that portion of the franchise, 7 and 8. But they're still great games. That doesn't make it any less valiant of games. I just wish I would understand a little more on the Umbrella side. And Resident Evil 4 is a little like that. At least in this game, they do tease Umbrella being involved in 4 in some way. Obviously, I think I think Umbrella as a company always takes like the backside after events of like Resident Evil 2 in the movies. But this game truly is amazing. I'm glad I bought it. I'm glad I played it. And I plan on playing it again. It's probably the only Resident Evil games I really felt like, wow, I really want to experience doing all of that again. I think the only other Resident Evil game that made me want to do that was Resident Evil 2 Remake. 5 was fun, but I did 5 co-op, and that's probably the best experience you're ever gonna get out of 5 is co-op. I think Resident Evil 4 deserves to probably have co-op. I think it probably should have had co-op for a good portion of this game. You do a lot of stuff by yourself, but then you also do some stuff with other people, which isn't so bad. Now, I hope they remake Resident Evil 5 and 6 after this. I don't think they will. I think those games are too new in that regard. But time will only tell. I think the best bet would be to remake them together. Just do 5 and 6 in just one cohesive game. Just get it out of the way. 6 you could just touch up. I don't think you can do much about it story wise that would improve it. I think any changes are probably just muddy the waters anyway. If they want to continue with the story, I don't know what they consider canon for Resident Evil. I don't understand it that much. Like the games, they're fun action games, and regardless of the story, the gameplay was truly amazing. A lot of the encounters throw enemies at you and different enemy types where you have to learn to deal with them. There's enemies where you can allow to get close to you for like a little bit of time where you don't have to worry about them. And there's enemies where long range or close range, you need to deal with them first. They need to go, they need to go. But yeah, that's all I really want to say on Resident Evil. In terms of video games, I'm not really sure what I'll be playing in the future. I still want to go back and beat Wulong while it's on Game Pass, but I don't know if I'll be doing that. No other games really coming out for this time, so this time of year is a little slow. I think I'll try to make or play through a lot of games that I've already played through, at least for this year. I'm not really sure. Maybe I'll give Game Pass a quick run through and see what they got on there. But at least for now, I'm not really sure what game I'm going to be playing in here. Lately, I have been reading the book The Moon is a Harsh Mistress by Robert Heinlein. And this book is really good so far. It's about a revolution that begins on the moon where the main characters use this like AI to plan their revolution. You know, how they go about it, who they bring in, the format and the structure of the revolution itself, who's in it, how they communicate. And that's really cool. That's probably my favorite thing about it is seeing the revolution kind of grow and form from a start. And the things that they talk about in this book are pretty cool. I think it may have came out in the 60s. I'm not really sure, but it takes place in a futuristic 2075 where part of the world is still the way it is with the major countries, stuff like that. But obviously things have changed to where these countries now send their criminals off to live on the moon and mine the resources from the moon and bring them back to the planet Earth, Terra. And this is causing all kinds of issues where people on the moon are paying more for water and air than they would for if it's just taking it from the planet or the moon itself, and all those kind of issues that would come from uh, exports and imports, all that kind of stuff. Very similar to the American Revolution, I would say, in some kind of regard. I really like sci-fi because you get a lot of nuances to like human culture, depending on what your stance on certain ideologies in our society. A lot of that does change in the future. I think it's one of the greatest aspects of sci-fi is that you're not just getting differences in technology or space kind of stuff. You get things about our human culture. One of those things I've really loved is how issues, at least around our time, or much more prominent in the past, start to become non-issues in the future. One example is how people treat women in the future version of this book, at least on the moon. On the moon, in the Moon is Harsh Mistress, there's only about uh, a few million people on the planet itself, on the moon, and only half of that, less than half of that, are fully women, are women of uh, age to have children or that kind of uh, ability. And those women are extremely coveted, but they're also well protected to the degrees where sexual assault, if found by any other males in the society, it doesn't have to be a family member or a friend. It could just be a bystander from the street. If they witness a assault on a woman in any fashion, the assaulter could be like spaced, just sent out of an airlock, out onto the harsh vacuum of space, and just killed. Which is, I wouldn't say the right move, but it is a harsh duality compared to nowadays, where a trial and all those things will be occur. That does happen in the book. There is a faux trial, but it's very different. There's no like set judge or jury. It's literally on the street where a group of boys take another. He's a He's a tourist. They take a tourist who had like gotten too physical with a local girl, and these boys take the assaultee and they say, "Hey, we need to find a judge." And they point out who's the main character in the book. They nominate him as judge. They pay him. They set random people to be a jury. They set sides. They let certain people talk their sides, and then it comes to a pretty uh, well-rounded kind of decision where the assaultee uh, was decided to have punished enough, as he didn't understand the customs or the ways of the moon. He was a fully tourist there, and he didn't understand the ways that the moon worked, and that could have landed him to death. But because of the way that the society was structured, they came to agreement that he didn't know what he was doing on the get go. Obviously, if he does it again, that'd probably be a worse decision. But I like little nuances about that with science fiction. That's always really cool. Um, I'm only 160 pages in, and it's really fun so far. I'm excited to see where this revolution goes for the story. Not so much keen on some of the characters. A lot of them are pretty weird. I think the main character is kind of like your Mary Sue kind of man guy. He seems to be really good at everything. He's like the tech guy behind the AI. He didn't make it, but he works on it, and he seems to be extremely smart for a main character, or at least a kind of main character in this field. He seems to understand a lot about the way the moon works and the politics and the culture there. Obviously, he's lived there for however many years, it seems like. They don't tell you everything outright. I always think that books written before a certain time always have uh, difficulty with its writing. A lot of the phrases and uh, words they use don't really blend well with this how I think people talk or type in recent days. A lot of words are just missing in The Moon is the Harsh Mistress. I don't think it's an editing thing because it seems too frequent. But like some sentences seem like they're missing the word the or a or sometimes like that. I never understood if it's the writing by the writer itself, maybe editing problem, but it does. I do think it comes from like a way people wrote or spoke decades beyond when the book was written. That's what I would think. This book is pretty good so far. Not sure what I'll read next, but I'm probably just gonna finish this and see where that takes me. Lastly, what I want to talk about is probably what I'll be doing in the future. I do plan on catching up on the My Hero Academia and One Piece mangas. I want to see where we currently are in the Shigaraki Deku fight. That all seems crazy. Last thing I saw was, I think, I'm sorry, I'm always the worst with names, but like the two hacker villains are currently trying to defend, or like the hero hacker and the villain hacker are like at odds, trying to keep the floated UA school up in the air. I think now it's crashing down at some rate. So that's really harrowing. I think it's a really cool idea for a superhero franchise. My Hero Academia has been really cool so far. I probably, once I catch up on the manga, is when I'll get back onto the anime and catch up, because I still have Hulu, and I want to see what Deku's story uh, goes on from there. I hope this isn't the end of My Hero. I really hope they do like a Shippuden kind of thing. I hope that it ends pretty soon, so that they can get onto the My Hero Shippuden stuff. Let a little time move on, like a time skip or like time in our world, and then start the story off fresh with however it ends, and get us some new villains. Like, I like Shigaraki. Shigaraki seems much more of a sad villain of like happenstance, or just a broken home, or unguidance. Obviously, he doesn't really seem like the person who's like one for all, who's trying to drive society in a direction. He's obviously a tool, Shigaraki. He is obviously a tool, but I don't think he's a grandstand villain. I think he's a cool villain for Deku, right? I think Deku's going to turn him to being a good friend. It seems like that, right? The anime seems like it's going to end with Deku and Shigaraki kind of becoming friends by the end. It seems like that based on their backstories and the way Deku treats Shigaraki. But I don't think Shigaraki should be the definitive Deku villain. I don't know. I feel like the definitive Deku villain is like someone who had power from the get go and just annihilates using it. One for All just kind of shares it and wants more power from it. That's what that seems. Shigaraki just wants the world to accept him in some way because he wasn't accepted before, and it's really cool. If you don't like My Hero, I don't know what to say to you. I love it. I think My Hero is really fun. The last movies were pretty good. I think the first movie was a good start. You know, it had a really good opening with like its world building. The event was cool with the hero island kind of place, but the villain was pretty weak. He just kind of got shoehorned in there for all for one lore, or sorry, one for all lore. And the second movie was pretty good. I like the fight scenes a lot more in that one. It had really cool moments with Deku and Bakugo by the end, with them sharing uh, their all for one powers or whatever. That was pretty dope. But the third movie was, I think, the weakest. The third My Hero movie. It had like two or three songs, which weren't terrible, but a lot of that movie was just songs. And then it was just kind of like the road trip My Hero movie. I'd still watch it again, but it's definitely my least favorite. I do want to get back on the One Piece manga. The One Piece manga just ended on the Wano arc a few months ago, and I'm still pretty behind on whatever it is currently. I know the One Piece Odyssey game came out a while ago, and I like to play that. The last One Piece thing I did was watch the movie Red, One Piece Red, and that was really fun. I really liked the music uh, villain there. Her entire stick of trying to make people be in a happier world. This place sucks. It's only war. I liked that. That was really fun. Probably the next thing I'll start is The Mandalorian. I know that's probably ending within the next few weeks, and I like it. I like The Mandalorian as a TV show. I've only seen seasons one to two. I haven't seen anything but season three, and I'm I'm not as keen on watching season three as I've been the other seasons or even the other shows. Um, I really like Mandalorian season one because it felt like a proper adventure. It felt like this main character uh, is thrust into this kind of role that he never should have taken on, and now he has to survive with this little bundle of force, the Baby Yoda kind of character, Grogu. That's kind of cool. I think that's the spider episode of season one in the ice cave was really good, and then I think season one had a really good ending where I believe he gives Grogu off at the end of season one, or maybe it's the beginning of season two, but he does send him off to be his own person. And then he comes back and takes him by season two or so. And season two just kind of really muddied the waters, I would say, because it felt less of a Mandalorian story and much more of an overall Star Wars story. If you know what that means, then it just feels like it was a story set for a much grander purpose in the Star Wars universe than simply the Mandalorian doing. Obviously, it's called the Mandalorian, and whatever Grogu is going to happen is going to propel the future of Star Wars in some way, and we can't deny that. But I do think the show called Mandalorian should focus on a little more Mandalorianish issues than more Force and Jedi stuff. I've kind of gotten over all that. I think Andor was really good. Andor was a phenomenal episode. It was thrilling. It was suspenseful. I didn't know what was going to happen. I think all the villains were really, really true villains in that show. They weren't just bad for being bad. They were people who have this position in this company or this military or that regime where it's you do your job or you get booted out, killed, and someone else does that job for you. That's how the villains in the Star Wars are when they're not like force-bearing gods. They're just regular human people, at least in terms of the Empire kind of space, just either collecting a paycheck for the job or doing it for like blood and glory, which you mostly just see them doing for a paycheck. And the Mandalorian, I generally don't even know why he does most of the things he does besides just protect Grogu, because it seems like him by himself, he just shouldn't be winning any of these fights at all. He's usually outnumbered for half the time. He gets friends shown up halfway through the show to help him out. I think the insert with Boba Fett and Luke Skywalker at the end of Mandalorian season 2 was probably the biggest disservice to the show itself for season 2, because it took the entire spotlight off of Mandalorian and I think Grogu. I absolutely think it does. Boba Fett, the TV show, was I think not super good. Um, I think I think the best part about it was only Boba Fett doing stuff with the Tusken Raiders. But by the time Boba Fett decides to become like the warlord of Tatooine, you've had enough of Tatooine. You've had enough of Boba Fett. That's what I have to say on that show. And the Obi-Wan show was cool. It was really cool to see these actors come back in some way. It was really cool to see kind of a deeper narrative between the relationship between Obi-Wan and the younger Leia and Luke in some regard, and then the Darth Vader. But ultimately, that show was not needed. That show wasn't needed in any capacity. I don't count it in my own personal Star Wars lore because I don't know, nothing about the show really made me like it. I didn't think the kid who played Leia was terrible. I think Christensen and the guy who plays Obi-Wan are still really good actors. They obviously did a really good job, but the penultimate of that show was to see Darth Vader again. That was kind of cool for a moment. They have a weird fight with Obi-Wan and Vader in like a quarry place, and they're flinging rocks and shit with the Force. Not the worst, but the entire Obi-Wan show seemed like it was Obi-Wan trying not to do the things that we saw him do earlier in the movies, the prequel stuff. Like, he has a chance to end this now, and he doesn't even try. Obviously, he has to try and get that Leia and the kid off planet or whatever. But I don't know. I don't think Obi-Wan was needed as a show. It is cool in like the larger expanded universe, but it's not lore on my end. And yeah, that's probably what you can be looking forward to. At least next episode, me talking about the mangas that I caught up to and the Mandalorian, whatever progress I make in The Moon is a Harsh Mistress, and if I choose to play a video game this week, then we'll see what game that is. This has been episode 4 of the Gamer Librarian podcast. You can find us on YouTube, Spotify, Amazon, DZ, and Podcast Addicts. Be sure to follow for updates on future episode releases. Thank you, and see you next time.